Hello and thanks for joining me for some more landscape photography. Today I've got the whole day to myself. I'm currently on the beach at Newborough and I'm heading over to Llanddwyn Island. We're right in the depths of midwinter, although it's quite a pleasant day as it happens. It's the day after winter solstice, and I'd thought about heading into the mountains, but they're all pretty clagged up, so there wouldn't have been much to see. Also, I don't think I've brought you down to any Anglesey beaches for quite a while, so I thought, why not have a change? Now, of course, Llanddwyn Island is a bit of a classic. A lot of you may have seen it done to death, and I thought to myself, do I really want to bring you along today? Because I've been down here probably 15 times this year. But then it occurred to me, actually, I haven't filmed here since the day I took the very first shot with this Olympus EM1 Mark II back in January of 2019. And so I thought, it's a nice day. I've got the whole day to myself, which is really important, so I can really take my time. There's a couple of images specifically that I want that I haven't really got before. So I'm going to be looking for that. One is something a bit different on the island itself. The other is where I am at the moment in the forest on the edge of the beach, because there's a particular sort of shot that I've been after for a while from this area, and probably the sort of thing that you might not have seen much of. So I'm going to have a scout around here to start off with and then head on down to the island. I've been working on this particular composition for about 90 minutes, looking for exactly the right set of elements to bring together to create an image that really reflects the atmosphere and the nature of Newborough Beach. If you've ever been here, you'll know about the way the Corsican pines flank the beach along the marram grass dunes as you head down to Llanddwyn Island. Now, what most photographers tend to do is to pitch straight down to the island to get the classic shots, and of course, it's pretty spectacular, there's no two ways about it. But I've always wanted an image that kind of reflects the feeling of the beach itself, especially with these trees that really struggle in the winter storms, and all the trees along the front of the forest are snapped off by the savage winds that blow up the Irish Sea. So I wanted an image that shows you that glimpse through the trees. The light had to be perfect and all the elements had to be perfect. And everything had to line up so that I've got the Llyn Peninsula and some interesting cloud textures in the background. Because if one of those elements was missing, the whole image just wouldn't quite work. So I've worked really hard to find a vantage point that allowed me to get far enough back from the mid-ground, which is where I've got some tree stumps that I wanted. I wanted to be at least 20 or 30 meters back from those, and ideally I would have been like to have been another 20 meters or so, because I wanted to use a long focal length to pull the peninsula in and compress the image, because I don't want to lose the peninsula in the background. Now, what I've managed to find is a view that leads you through a gap in the trees, which is kind of hard to find because they're all so higgledy-piggledy. There aren't many that allow you to get back from the edge of the beach. I've got some broken off tree stumps, but what I've also got is a brand new sapling right in the foreground, a beautiful little start of a Christmas tree about that high. And I really wanted to get that in the shot, and I've been able to do that. I've been really lucky. When I was taking a few exposures earlier on, I got some lovely side light on it. I have to be careful with that because the pine needles are really new and shiny. It's very easy to blow them out as the light bounces off them, so I had to be quite careful. What I've also been able to do is to get a couple of nice interesting tree stumps in, and even though they are relatively backlit, by waiting for the sun to go behind a cloud, one of the exposures that I'm going to use to bring together the entire image has those with a little bit of detail visible on this side of them, because I didn't want them as just slabs of black. They're quite interesting shapes, but at the same time I did want to see a little bit of detail on this side of them. In the far distance, I've got some lovely mist at the base of the mountains on the Llŷn Peninsula. I'm looking straight across at the rivals and some fabulous cloud textures with a bit of side light illuminating the bases of the clouds. So I've got all of the elements that have come together quite nicely in this. So I've used 4 exposures for this particular image to bring it together. I focused on the sapling in the foreground, then a little bit further back. Bear in mind that because I'm using a really long focal length and quite a wide aperture, I'm at f5.6, so I am going to struggle with focus if I don't stack it, but I'm also exposure blending, so even if I didn't need to focus stack, I really did want to blend those exposures. Even with a 0.9 soft grad, the sky was going to blow out and I wouldn't have the detail that I wanted if I was going to capture the foreground detail, where there are some quite deep shadows because I'm set back into the forest. So that was quite a long explanation. But hopefully you'll see what I mean when I bring it all together to show you the finished image. I hadn't quite got down onto the island yet. I was just heading along the Shingle rather than take the main path, because very often along here when the tide's just right you can find quite an interesting composition. And that's just what I've happened to do here. What caught my eye was the way these little shingle banks create some lovely curves, but they do lead you across to a little rocky outcrop, and then of course that standard backdrop of the Llŷn Peninsula. And of course that is one of the things that photographers love around here, is that you don't just have a horizon with the sea, you have something to take your eye through the image. But this works quite well as quite a long image, because I've got a nice foreground diagonal, some really interesting texture, and this gravel is catching a bit of side light as the sun has just gone behind a slightly hazy cloud bank, and so the light isn't that intense, and these little bits of shingle in the foreground almost like glitter. Really quite enjoying this one. Technically not difficult at all really. I'm shooting at 31mm f5.6, a single exposure, focused about a third of the way in. I don't mind if the mountains are slightly soft in this image. This is all about the shapes of the water and the shingle on the beach. I think it's fair to say there probably isn't a better composition than the standard shot of the tower with the path leading up to it, which I'm sure you've seen 5,000 times. But what I've done here is I'm still probably a good 500-600 meters away from the tower itself, and I've got my lens out at 100 millimeters, so that gives a full frame equivalent of 200 millimeters to give you an idea of what I'm doing here. But I've got some foreground rocks. They've got some absolutely beautiful texture on them, getting a nice bit of side light, and the sun is quite hazy at the moment, which is just perfect. I've got some definition behind the tower as well. So what I've done is I've used these couple of beautiful rocks that point you across to the tower as my foreground, but you can see from the composition that there's that gulf between where I am and where the tower is. So the nearest rock I'm going to leave completely out of focus. I'm going to focus stack the middle rock and the tower, and hopefully that'll make not necessarily the best composition, but an interesting composition. Now this is the second image that I'd said I was hoping to get today, and it required two distinct sets of conditions to come together for it to work out. The first, which I could plan easily enough, was the exact position of the tide. The second was whether or not I'd get any of the winter sidelight that I was hoping for, that you might get at this time of year. And I've been very lucky on the sidelight. So with both of those conditions together, I'm hoping I can get quite a good shot of Turbach. Now Turbach, of course, is the poor cousin of Turmawr, which is what everybody comes here to shoot. But I really like this little tower. It's got bags of character stuck out on a little rock all by itself. And what I've done is I've set myself up with a composition that I've had in mind for some time that creates different layers of depth in it. I've got marram grass in the foreground. I've got a mid-ground of the beach sweeping the tide around to the tower itself, and then of course that backdrop of the mountains. Now I've used 4 separate exposures for this: a dark exposure for the mountains so I don't clip the sky highlights, a much brighter mid-ground exposure for the tower itself because I want to be able to pull the detail out of it, and I really like the light and the shadow that the side light was throwing across the grass where the tower is. I've got some marram grass in the very foreground, which I shot with a fast shutter speed to freeze it. And now I'm working on the waves and as they run round the beach and create that lovely curve that leads your eye round to the tower. And what I've done with this, I've put a 10 stop on, which is getting me a 6-second exposure in this bright daylight. And that's just perfect to create the arc as the waves, instead of being all higgledy-piggledy, average out because the beach is beautifully curved. And that's what I was trying to achieve. Well, I've just managed to perch myself on top of a rock here, looking across towards Turmawr, but that's not in my shot. I'm looking down on the beach, and what I've been doing is catching the waves as they roll off, create some really nice streaks as the surf runs across the shingle. And what I've been doing is using a 6-stop ND filter to get a shutter speed of about 4 seconds. I let the wave run up the beach, and just as it's starting to roll back down, I open the shutter and let it roll all the way down. By the time it gets to the bottom, the next wave is starting to come in, which then creates a ridge in the long exposure. I've got a little slice of sky at the top, with the rocks above it to frame it. I didn't want to leave the sky out altogether because I wanted the context and to get a bit of depth into the shot. So that strip of sky is quite deliberate, but it's really all about the movement in the water. Well, as I'm sure you can imagine, I do come down to Llanddwyn Island quite a lot. This year I've been here with Gary Norman, Darren Knight, Mally Davis, Tom Peters, Photo Ninja, Rob Oughton. But I don't vlog here myself very often because I don't want the place to get a bit tired. I don't want you to get fed up with seeing it. But for the landscape photographer, it is an absolute dream. It's no wonder people come from far and wide to visit this place. And if you get an opportunity to, I strongly recommend it. I'm going to leave it there for this one. I'm really happy with the images I've got today. I've taken my time over it and really thought about what I was doing, so probably fewer images than I would normally show you from a whole day out. But it's time for me to clock out now. Thank you ever so much for coming along with me. I really hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, why not subscribe now and join me next time. Cheers.